Hello students. So in the last class we have discussed about the evolution of psychology and the development of psychology in India. In today's presentation, I will cover branches of psychology where we have cognitive psychology, biological psychology, developmental psychology, social psychology, cross-cultural and cultural psychology, environmental psychology, health psychology, clinical and counseling psychology, industrial psychology, educational psychology, sports psychology, and at last I will cover psychologists at work. Okay, so now let us go through the branches of psychology. And when we say branches of psychology, that is various fields of specialization are there in psychology, which have been emerged over the past few years. Okay, so the first one is the cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology, that is a branch of psychology that investigates mental processes. And by mental processes, I have already discussed with you people that involves in acquisition, storage, manipulation, and transformation of information received from the environment, along with its use and communication. The major cognitive processes are attention, perception, memory, reasoning, problem solving, decision making, and language. Alright, so cognitive psychologists, they basically study the mental processes, and that's why the cognitive psychologists often collaborate with neuroscientists and computer scientists. Number two is the biological psychology. This branch of psychology focuses on the relationship between behavior and the physical system, including the brain and the rest of the nervous system, the immune system, and the genetics. So biological psychologists often collaborate with the neuroscientist again. Then there is geologist and anthropologist. So the field of research where psychologists and neuroscientists are working together is known as neuropsychology. So the biological psychologist basically focuses on, on the understanding of the relationship between behavior and with the various physical system in our body. Okay, that also includes the brain and the rest of the nervous system. So in our brain, there are certain neurotransmitters, or we can say chemical substances, which are responsible for various neural communication in different areas of the brain, and therefore it is associated with the mental functions. Okay, so in order to understand that how these neurotransmitters are responsible in behavior of different people, because for different situations, people different people, they behave in certain order. So in order to understand that what role does the neurotransmitters play in it, the biological psychology focuses its attention into that area. Number three is the developmental psychology. It is another branch and very important and interesting branch of psychology that studies the physical, social, and psychological changes that occur at different ages and stages over a lifespan. So we can say from the time of a person in the womb till the old age. The developmental psychologist primarily concerned on how we become what we are. So its major emphasis is not only on child but also on adolescents as well as adults development and aging. They focus on the biological, sociocultural, and environmental factors that influence psychological characteristics like intelligence, emotion, and social relationship, etc. So, as human beings, as we have to pass from one stage to another, we have to go through certain transitions in our life, and also we have to achieve certain milestones. So, in order to understand the complete development of a person, the developmental psychologists uh, concern on the development as a whole of that individual. Okay, so many times what happens if a child is not showing the developmental milestones at the age of 5. If the child is still lagging behind the counterpart of the other individuals of that same age, that means there is certain issues going on with that child. That's what the developmental psychologists try to understand. Number 4, social psychology. Social psychology is the branch of psychology that explores how people are affected by their social environments, how people think about the influence of others, and topics such as attitudes, conformity, and obedience to authority, interpersonal attraction, aggression, prejudice, intergroup relations, helpful behavior, and so are of interest by the social psychologists. As we are social beings, we are surrounded by our social environments. So, in order to understand how other people influence and what other people think, as well as how other people think, the social psychologist gives emphasis on this psychological attributes. Number 5, cross-cultural and cultural psychology. Now, this branch of psychology examines the role of culture in understanding behavior, thought, and emotion. Okay, so it assumes that human behavior is not only a reflection of human or biological potential, but also a product of culture. So, according to this psychologist, those who are in this branch, they believe that our behavior, it is actually a product of culture. Therefore, behavior should be studied in its socio-cultural context. As you all know, our Indian culture and Western culture, it is not same, right? So, here in this branch, that is cross-cultural and cultural psychology, many times psychologists see that how one culture affects another culture, as well as how culture has its impact on the behavior of an individual. Okay. Number 6, environmental psychology. Now, environmental psychology, it deals with man and environmental relationship. So it studies the interaction of physical factors such as temperature, humidity, pollution, and natural disasters on human behavior, the influence of physical arrangement of the workplace on health, the emotional state, and interpersonal relations. And current topics of research in this field are the extent to which disposal of waste, population explosion, conservation of energy, efficient use of community resources are associated with and are functions of human behavior. So here it not only give importance on how the physical factors or the physical environment impacts on human behavior, but also it studies how human behavior can have an impact or influence on the environment. Okay? Many times you see no, that with the increase of temperature, people are also very aggressive at that moment. For example, when you uh, travel in any public transport and it's a very hot weather, and then there is lots of traffic jam, at that moment you can see the driver is also getting heated up and he starts abusing others. Yes, so that is how the temperature, the humidity has an impact on human behavior. That means human behaviors can be said to be aggression. Okay. Number 7 is health psychology. Health psychology focuses on the role of psychological factors like stress and anxiety in the development, prevention, and treatment of illness. And areas of interest are stress and coping, relationship between psychological factors and health, patient-doctor relationship, and ways of promoting health enhancing factors. Health psychology is very important in clinical setup in hospitals basically. So there what happens if a doctor doesn't have the basic psychological knowledge, then the patients do not feel comfortable. And also there is difference between a doctor who have basic psychological knowledge and the one who do not have. Now here, if you go to a doctor and the doctor straight away asks you the reason why you have visited the doctor, and you tell the reason, and the doctor, without examining, without saying anything else, straight away prescribes you certain medicines. Okay, one instance. In another instance, you go to another doctor and that doctor listens to you, asks you, yes, of course, the doctor will ask you the reason, and he does the initials. Initials like he or she, the doctor, might ask you your name, he might have a good rapport with you, he or she will try to form a rapport, that means he or she will try to make you comfortable, he or she will talk with you, he or she will give time to you and listen to you. So in these two instances, to which doctor would you prefer to go? Of course, the second one, the one who listens to you, not the one who doesn't listen to you and straight away give you all medicine, right? So that's where health psychology comes into handy. That means it is helpful in in development, prevention, and treatment of illness. Okay. Number 8, it is clinical psychology. Clinical psychology is another branch of psychology that deals with causes, treatment, and prevention of different types of psychological disorders, such as anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and chronic substance abuse. They basically work in clinical setups, hospitals. Number 9, counseling psychology. So, this is a related area under clinical psychology only, but it aims to improve everyday functioning by helping people solve problems in daily living and cope more effectively with challenging situations. Now, counselors are basically studying counseling psychology, and counselors, you all know, even we have in our school, they are the school counselors. Okay, they do not deal with clinical setups, but then counselors is also in a team under the clinical psychology. So these are the two related areas of study under psychology. Number 10, industrial or organizational psychology. This branch of psychology is of very recent origin and it deals with workplace behavior, focusing on both the workers and the organizations that employ them. It is concerned with training employees, improving work conditions, and developing criteria for selecting employees. The background of industrial and organizational psychologists often includes training in cognitive and social psychology. Many times in industrial setup or organizational setup, people basically the workers, they have to go through certain psychological issues. One might have stress related issue, the another might have adjustment issue. So there industrial and organizational psychology comes to help them. Okay. Number 11, educational psychology. Educational psychology it studies how people of all ages learn. So primarily, it helps to develop instructional methods that is used to train people in both educational and work settings. And a related field of educational psychology is school psychology that focuses on designing programs that promote intellectual, social, and emotional development of children, including those with special needs. Number 12, sports psychology. Sports psychology it applies psychological principles to improve sports performance by enhancing their motivation, and it is relatively a new field. Now sports psychology or the sports psychologists they work with the sports persons. Okay, now in our Indian team also they have sports psychologists, and they focuses their concern on motivating the sportsmen. Many times we have seen how audiences behave as fans towards that particular sportsman. Now, sports persons, they are also an individual, isn't it? They have to deal with that. Now, imagine a person who, for the first time, enters the stadium and he looks at the huge crowd. Of course, he or she, the player, will feel lots of pressure, tension, anxiety, stress, everything comes. But then it is the duty of the sports psychologist to cope with these issues and motivate the sports persons. Many times we have seen the crowds, the audiences, they behave in a very difficult way. They behave in a very aggressive way. Aggressive way as such that if the team plays well, they the audience are also very happy. But then if the team doesn't play well, here team, for instance our Indian team of cricket, if the Indian team doesn't play well, what do the audiences do? They will throw stones, they will uh, they will say some abusive languages, they will use words which are basically slangs. What is this kind of behavior? It's really hurtful for the players, isn't it? Because when they're doing good, when they're playing well, when they're winning, everyone appreciates. But then every day it is not same. They are also human beings, and after all, it's just a game. One have to lose if the another has to win. So sometimes one may lose, sometimes another may lose. Yes, so that doesn't mean that everyone every day should be winning. That's not possible. And in that situation, when the people start burning banners, throwing stones at their bus when they arrive or when they go out of the stadium, it is very hurtful to the players. And that plays on their mind. So next time when they reach the stadium and even before performing, they have to practice, isn't it? So during practice time itself, the sports psychologist should maintain their emotional health, their mental health, and should try to motivate towards their performance and not how the people are behaving. So that's the role of sports psychologist over here. And finally, with all these branches of psychology, there are even more branches of psychology. Here, only just some of the names have been mentioned. Okay, those are just emerging branches of psychology at the present situation. So those are aviation psychology, space psychology, military psychology, forensic psychology, community psychology, psychology of women, managerial psychology, and so on. Next, psychologists at work. Now we have gone through the various branches of psychology. Yes, now let us see psychologists today work in a variety of settings where they can apply psychological principles for teaching and training people to cope effectively with the problems of their lives. Okay, so often they're referred to as human service areas, and as such, psychologists work in as clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist, community psychologist, and so on. Now let us go through one by one. Clinical psychologists, what they do work and what they do. So clinical psychologists, they specializes in helping clients with behavioral problems by providing therapy for various mental disorders and in cases of anxiety, fear, or stresses at home or at work. So they work either as private practitioners or at hospitals, mental institutions, or with social agencies. They may be involved in conducting interviews as well as administering psychological tests to diagnose their clients' problems and use psychological methods for their treatment and rehabilitation. So, job opportunities in clinical psychology attract quite a few to this field of psychology. Counseling psychologists, they work with persons who suffer from motivational and emotional problems. They may be involved in vocational rehabilitation programs, helping persons in making professional choices or in adjusting to new and difficult situations of life. They work for public agencies such as mental health centers, hospitals, schools, colleges, and universities. Now, clinical psychologists and counseling psychologists, they have difference, and you should know what difference lies over here. So the work of clinical psychologists does not differ from that of counseling psychologists much, but although a counseling psychologist sometimes deals with people who have less serious problems. Counseling psychologists, they work basically with students by advising them about personal problems and career planning. Okay, so the counseling psychologists, they do not deal with serious problems like that of schizophrenia and so on. That is the department of the clinical psychologist to deal with serious mental issues or serious psychological disorders. Counselors, they just deal with the day-to-day issues where a person is not able to cope up with. Okay. Now, many times people ask what is the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. So, a psychologist and a psychiatrist, they basically study the causes, treatment, and prevention of psychological disorders. Till here, both are same. But they both differ in the fact that a clinical psychologist has a degree in psychology, which includes intensive training in treating people with psychological disorders. And on the other hand, a psychiatrist has a medical degree with years of specialized training in the treatment of psychological disorders. Okay, so a psychologist, whatever be it, only a psychologist, be it clinical psychologist, counseling psychologist, any psychologist, they basically has a degree in psychology, which includes intensive training in treating people with psychological disorders. Whereas a psychiatrist has a medical degree with years of specialized training in the treatment of psychological disorders. And one very important difference lies that psychiatrists can prescribe medications and give electroshock treatment, whereas a psychologist cannot prescribe medication. Okay. Number three, community psychologists. Community psychologists, they generally focus on problems related to community mental health by helping the community and its institutions in addressing physical and mental health problems. So they work for mental health agencies, private organizations, and state governments, also with special population as the elderly or the physically or mentally challenged. So besides the redirection and evaluation of various programs and plans, community-based rehabilitation is of major interest to community psychologists. Number four, school psychologists. School psychologists, they work in educational systems, okay, and their roles vary according to the levels of the training. For example, some school psychologists only administer tests, whereas others interpret test results to help students with their problems. Okay, they also help in the formulation of school policies. So many times there are certain school policies. For different schools, they have their own policies. Yes, so it is through the help of the school psychologist that any school formulates any school policy. Okay, and they facilitate communication between parents, teachers, and administrators, and also provide teachers and parents with information about the academic progress of a student. So basically, they keep a healthy relationship with parents to any school administrator or the teachers. Number five, organizational psychologists. Organizational psychologists help in dealing with problems that the executives and employees of an organization tend to face in their respective roles. So they provide consultancy services and organize skill training programs in order to enhance their efficiency and effectiveness. Some of them specializes in human resource development (HRD), while others in organizational development and change management programs. So, for example, an organizational psychologist might recommend that a company may adopt a new management structure that would increase communication between managers and staff. The background of industrial and organizational psychologists, as I said already, they includes training in cognitive and social psychology. Okay, so basically, they focuses on the communication between managers and staff. What should be the new policy that the company might adopt? If there is any management structure that needs to be changed, that is also being advised or recommended by an organizational psychologist. Okay, so with this, I have covered the branches of psychology, as well as we have seen how some of the psychologists work in their own related field. And likewise, you can also have a concept or an idea regarding all other psychologists working in different branches of psychology.